everyone, I'm Ranger Rachel. I'm the Chief Ranger of Visitor Experience here at Natural Tunnel State Park, and today I'm going to share with you how to innovate our invasive plant species. And so what we're going to do is take a few invasive plants, repurpose them, and turn them into something new. So one of the goals here at Natural Tunnel State Park is to remove invasive plant species. That way our native flora can really thrive. And while we can't completely rid our parks or even our own backyards of invasive plants, we can certainly try and mitigate to the best that we can. Not only are we going to remove plant species today, we're going to repurpose them. And repurposing is something that we see almost daily. So whether it's recycling plastic bottles or aluminum cans, we're using glass jars or even plastic tubs for storage, because who doesn't need the same look-alike butter containers to store your leftovers in? Am I right? And while invasive plants may not have the most positive impact on our native landscapes, we can certainly turn this negative into a positive by innovating those invasives. And so what's that saying? Turning lemons into lemonade? Well, in this case, we are going to turn our invasive plant species into paper today. Before we get started, let's take a look back and see when paper first came about. So earliest records say that the Chinese invented the art of paper making. So the bark of a mulberry tree was the first product used to make paper. And after that, they started to discover that other plants or resources could also make the pulp to help create the base for paper. So they used bamboo, hemp, and even old fishing nets that they weren't using anymore. The paper that we are used to nowadays looks a lot different. It looks a lot different even compared to 200 years ago. And so the process is pretty much the same. We just have gotten a little bit more advanced and we use different materials. And so nowadays our modern paper is made from wood pulp and recycled paper. And back then they mainly focused on using plant fibers to make their paper. So it looks a little different than what we're used to seeing or writing on, but regardless, paper and the art of paper making really overall changed the form of communication from there on out. So earlier I mentioned the term plant fiber pulp, and basically what that is are plant fibers that we mash up and we mix them with water, and that creates the pulp, and that will be our main ingredient for making paper. Let's talk about the plant fibers, or the material that makes up the plant itself. So basically, let's break it down onto a cellular level. So all plants have cells, just like you and I, and so this is going to be our plant cell. And so every plant cell has a cell wall, and the cell wall serves as protection, just like this box, and it will protect the cell from anything, and it will protect the organelles inside. That way the plant can function and live. And so plant cells have a cell wall that is made of cellulose, which is really unique and really cool, because cellulose is a type of sugar that is really strong. So when you think about sugar, we think of glucose or sugar you use to bake with, and that sugar dissolves really easily in water. Now our cellulose is a really strong sugar and it won't dissolve in water. So when we break our plants down to make our plant fiber pulp later on, those fibers, since they are made up of that cellulose, are going to be really strong, and it will help make some really strong paper. We'll get started. I'll show you all what types of invasive plants I decided to use for making paper, and then I'll break it down into a step-by-step. That way you all can follow along. So the first invasive I decided to use was garlic mustard. So it's easy to identify by the white flowers. It has broad leaves, and if you crush the leaves, they smell like garlic. The second plant I decided to use is Japanese honeysuckle. So that covers both the ground and acts as a vine. It can really overtake small trees or shrubs very easily. So I used both the leaves and the woody stems to make paper. The third plant I decided to use was Chinese silvergrass, or miscanthus. Very tall, and it grows in stalks, and it's a very prolific cedar, so it spreads really easily. But with all three of the plants I used, they grow in large groups or clusters, which is Good for what we're doing because when making paper we will need a lot of plant matter. A few items you'll need to make paper. You'll need a strainer to strain the plants after they're done boiling, an old blender that you're no longer using in your kitchen. You'll need a tub or container of some sort to put your pulp in for making paper. You'll need some washing soda or soda ash, and this is what we're going to add to our boiling plants, and it's going to help break down the plant material that much more. And then you'll also need a screen or frame of some sort. I got some frames from the Dollar Tree and stapled some window screen on there, and that is what we are going to use to dip our pulp into. And then you'll need a sponge and some felt, and the felt is what we are going to dry our paper on. And any type of fabric that can stretch will work because that'll help get the paper off once it's done drying. So the only other thing we need is the invasive plants. So let's go collect them. So after collecting the plants, I separated them into a bucket with stems and a bucket with leaves, just because the leaves will boil down a lot quicker than the stems. So once you have your plants ready to go, you can begin to boil water and add your washing soda or soda ash. And once the water is boiling, you can add your plants. I boiled the leaves from the garlic mustard, Chinese silvergrass, and honeysuckle for about 5 to 10 minutes. The woodier stems I allowed to boil for a little bit longer. That way they had a little bit more time to break down. And after that, I strained them with our strainer and added them to the blender. When blending the plant fibers in the blender, you can add a little bit of water. That way it's easier to mix it up. And once it's a fine texture, you can add it to your tubs and add water to that. And that is your pulp mixture. Here are my 3 tubs filled with the 3 different plant fiber pulps in them. And I made sure I added enough water. That way they were deep enough that I could dip the window screen into. And so now we're ready to dip the frames to make some paper. When dipping the window screen into the plant fiber pulp, you're going to want to come in at about a 45-degree angle and get it completely submerged underneath the surface. And then you can lift up and let the water drain for just a second and then transfer it to your tray. From here, you can grab your piece of felt and place it on top of your pulp fiber on the screen and then flip it over. And then this is when you're going to take your sponge and just absorb that water that is still left on the screen. And then you can gently remove the screen and you have the shape of your paper and you can let it dry. Once I have my paper on the piece of felt, I decided to put mine between 2 pieces of wood and some added weight just to make the paper as flat as possible, and I let it sit for a few days to dry completely. So once your paper is completely dry, you can begin to stretch the felt fabric away from the corners of your paper and it'll easily come right off and you have your finished product. Here are my final results. On the far left, the first 2 are the miscanthus or Chinese silvergrass. The next 2 are Japanese honeysuckle, and those seem to work the best. And then the very last one with the greenish tints was a combination of garlic mustard and honeysuckle. So I noticed that garlic mustard needed a little bit of an added pulp mixture to it. So I mixed the 2 and it worked out really well. just one way to innovate our invasives. And while the paper that I created may not look exactly like the paper we see or use nowadays, it was still really fun to experiment with those plants that I collected. And I even used the leftover stems and leaves from those invasives and wrote my name in nature on one of the pieces of paper I created. I encourage you all to go out in your backyard, see what invasives you have, and experiment and show us what you come up with. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.